Be me, Jimmy. Just a regular guy trying to make it work, have a decent job, a small apartment, a few good friends. For a while, I had a girlfriend, Eliana. When we first met, things were awesome. She was smart, funny, passionate about things. We clicked pretty much instantly. Felt like I'd finally found someone who got it. We moved in together after about a year. That's when the little things started to change. It wasn't sudden, more like a slow leak. Her passions started to get narrower. Everything, and I mean everything, became about feminism and social justice. Not the normal, hey, people should be treated fairly kind. This was different. It was academic, angry, and always present. It was like she'd swallowed a library of theory, and her only bodily function was to regurgitate it at me. Every conversation had to be filtered through this lens. I couldn't just enjoy something. It had to be analyzed. We'd watch a movie, an old classic I liked. Halfway through, she'd pause it. Then came the lecture. All about the male gaze, the problematic depiction of female characters, the inherent patriarchy of the narrative structure. I'd just be sitting there with a bowl of popcorn, wanting to see the cool explosion scene again. But now I had to sit through a 10-minute seminar. I'd just nod along. Yeah, that's a good point. Huh, I never thought of it that way. What else was I supposed to do? Argue about it? Arguing was a trap. If I disagreed, I was defensive, proof of my fragile male ego. If I agreed too quickly, I was patronizing, not truly understanding the depth of her intellectual labor. There was no winning move. The only option was to absorb the lecture and hope the movie would resume. It started bleeding into every aspect of life. I'd cook dinner for us after a long day at work. I'd try to make something nice, something she liked. She'd look at the meal and find a way. She would start talking about the history of domestic labor, how my one act of cooking didn't undo centuries of weaponized incompetence by men. I'm just trying to eat some spaghetti, man. But suddenly, I'm the avatar for all historical male laziness. My friends noticed it first. I'd have them over to watch a game. She wouldn't say much during the game, just sit in the corner on her laptop, but I could feel the disapproval radiating off her. After they left, the debriefing would begin. How my friends were a manifestation of toxic masculinity. The way they talked, the jokes they made, their very existence. These were guys I'd known since I was a kid, good guys. But in her eyes, they were a walking collection of problematic red flags. She wanted me to challenge them, to educate them. I tried to explain that's not how friendship works. That just led to another lecture about how I was enabling the system by staying silent. So I started seeing my friends less. It was just easier. Less friction at home. The apartment started to feel less like a home and more like a courtroom where I was permanently on trial. And Eliana was the prosecutor, judge, and jury. Every action, every word, every choice was evidence. Why did I choose that brand of coffee? Was I aware of their apparent company's political donations? Why did I use that particular turn of phrase? Did I realize its historical origins were problematic? I was constantly on edge, walking on eggshells. I started talking less, just to avoid saying the wrong thing. My default responses became, okay, you're right, and I understand. I thought this was just how serious relationships were, that this was the work everyone talks about. You compromise, you listen, you adapt. But I was the only one adapting. She never compromised. Her ideology was perfect, infallible. It was the world, and me, that had to change to match it. The last few months were the worst. The atmosphere in the apartment was thick with unspoken tension. I felt like I was losing myself, sanding down all the edges of my own personality just to fit into the tiny, approved space she allowed for me. I was tired. Not just sleepy, tired. A deep, bone-weary exhaustion. The kind you feel when you've been fighting a battle you can't win and aren't even sure why you're fighting it anymore. Which brings me to that Friday. It was just another Friday. Long week at work. Brain felt like scrambled eggs. All I wanted was to shut off for a few hours. I stopped on the way home, picked up a large pizza, the kind we both used to like. Got a 6-pack of some generic beer. Simple pleasures for a simple man. I walk in the door, and the vibe is already off. She's sitting on the couch, arms crossed, with that look on her face. The one that says a verdict has been reached, and I'm just here for the sentencing. I put the pizza on the counter. Hey, got us dinner. Silence. I tried again. Figured we could just chill, watch a movie or something. She finally speaks. Her voice is cold. She informs me that my choice of a greasy pizza is a passive-aggressive jab at her recent article about food production and its impact on marginalized communities. I just stared at the pizza box. It had cartoon characters on it. I told her I was just hungry and thought she might be too. That was the wrong thing to say. Apparently, I was dismissing her emotional labor by reducing the conversation to something as base as hunger. I sighed. Okay, fine. No pizza. What do you want to do? I suggested a new action movie that had just come out. Looked fun. Lots of car chases. Zero thinking required. It was like I had suggested we go burn down an orphanage. Her eyes went wide. She could not believe my audacity. She starts this rapid-fire monologue about how I'm actively trying to pump patriarchal propaganda into our home, how the film glorifies violence and objectifies women. I hadn't even seen the movie. I just saw a cool trailer. Okay, I said, holding my hands up. You pick the movie. Anything you want. Her choice? A 2-hour foreign documentary, black and white, no music. It was about the problematic nature of modern architecture. I swear, I am not making this up. We sit down to watch it. The pizza is sitting on the counter, getting cold. A monument to my crimes. I try to watch, I really do. But it's just long, slow pans over concrete buildings while a narrator drones on in a monotone. My brain is shutting down. The exhaustion from the week is catching up to me. My phone buzzes in my pocket. It's a text from one of my friends, a stupid meme. I pull it out and glance at it. I barely crack a smile. And that's when the world ended. She pauses the documentary. The silence that follows is heavier than any concrete building on screen. I look up. She is staring at me, her face a mask of pure fury. You are not even paying attention. I tried to explain. I'm sorry. I'm just really tired. It's been a long week. This was gasoline on a bonfire. Tired? She says, her voice dangerously quiet. You think you're tired? Do you have any idea of the emotional labor I perform on a daily basis? The effort it takes for me to deconstruct your ingrained societal programming, to educate you? That is real work. That is exhausting. And you sit here ignoring it, scrolling through memes with your troglodyte friends. I had nothing. No defense, no energy left to even try. I just looked at her and said the thing I was feeling most deeply. Eliana, I just want some quiet. Her face changed. The anger morphed into something else. A kind of cold, righteous certainty. It was the look of someone who has just had their grand theory of everything confirmed. She stands up. Fine, she says. You want quiet? You will have quiet. She starts pacing, like a professor about to deliver a thesis. You use silence as a weapon. It's called stonewalling, a classic tool of toxic masculinity to avoid accountability. I'm not, I started to say, but she cut me off. So, we're going to turn this into a learning experience for you, a period of reflection. She stops pacing and looks right at me. You are going to give me 11 days of silence. I just stared at her. It didn't compute. What? 11 days, she repeats, enunciating every syllable. One day for every month of the past year that I have had to carry the conversational burden in this relationship, plus one to grow on. You will not speak. Not to me, not to anyone in this apartment. You will listen. You will think about what it means to have your voice taken away. You will consider the space that women are denied in a patriarchal society. This is your penance. This is how you will atone for your emotional absenteeism. She was completely serious. She had this triumphant look in her eyes, like she'd just checkmated me in a game of chess I didn't even know we were playing. She thought she had me. She thought I'd beg, or argue, or explode. And then she'd have more ammunition, more proof of my toxicity. I looked at her smug, self-satisfied face. I looked at the cold pizza on the counter. I looked at the black and white concrete building frozen on the TV screen, and I felt something inside me just switch off. A little click, a circuit breaker flipping. All the frustration, the exhaustion, the constant effort to please her. It just vanished. It was replaced by a strange, hollow calm. I looked her dead in the eye, and in the calmest, clearest voice I had used in months, I said one word. Okay. The look on her face was priceless. It was a flicker of confusion. This wasn't in her script, but it was quickly replaced by that same smug certainty. She thought I was surrendering. She thought she had broken me. She had no idea she had just set me free. That was the last word I said to her. The first day was weird. I woke up and just didn't say good morning. I made my coffee in silence. She was practically buzzing with energy. She made a big show of her morning routine. She was talking, narrating her actions, as if to fill the void. Well, I am going to have a productive day, working to dismantle systemic oppression, she announced to the empty air. I just sipped my coffee and read the news on my phone. She kept glancing at me, expecting something. A pained look? A scribbled note begging for forgiveness? She got nothing, just my blank, neutral expression. Day 2 was more of the same, but worse. She had her friend over, the one who was basically her echo chamber. They sat in the living room, talking about me as if I wasn't even there. I was in the kitchen, making a sandwich, maybe 10 feet away. They were loud, deliberately loud. He's finally taking accountability, Eliana said, full of pride. It's a radical form of therapy for the male soul. He has to confront his own silence. Her friend chimed in. It's so brave of you to administer this. Most women wouldn't have the strength. I just kept making my sandwich. Lettuce, tomato, turkey. I could feel their eyes on my back. I was an exhibit in their social experiment, the caveman in repose. I took my sandwich and my glass of water and went to my room. I closed the door, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. The silence wasn't a punishment. It was a shield. Her words, their words, they just bounced off it. They couldn't get in. By day 3, something fundamental shifted. I woke up and the apartment was quiet. She was out somewhere. And the silence wasn't her silence, imposed on me. It was my silence. It belonged to me. I looked around the apartment, really looked at it. I started to notice all the little things that were out of place, broken, neglected. The wobbly leg on the coffee table that I'd been meaning to fix for months. The cluttered bookshelf, full of books I'd never read, and a bunch of her texts that I was supposed to have studied. The burned-out light bulb in the hallway. I spent the entire day just fixing things. I found my old toolbox, dusted it off. I tightened the leg on the table. Solid as a rock now. I changed the light bulb. Let there be light. I went through the bookshelf. I took all her dense academic books and stacked them neatly on her side of the bed. My side of the bookshelf I reorganized. My old sci-fi paperbacks, my history books, the travel guides for places I wanted to go someday. It felt good, using my hands, creating order out of chaos. It was a quiet, methodical, and deeply satisfying process. I didn't have to explain my choices or justify my actions. I just did them. When Eliana got home that evening, she stopped in the doorway. She looked around at the clean, orderly living room, the new light, the stable table. I was on the couch reading one of my old books. She looked at me, a strange expression on her face, a mixture of confusion and annoyance. "What is all this?" she asked. I just looked up from my book, met her eyes for a second, and then looked back down at the page. No response. As per the rules. Her rules. Her little experiment was backfiring. The silence was supposed to break me, make me contemplative and remorseful. Instead, it was healing me. Day 4. I decided to tackle the kitchen. I deep-cleaned everything. The oven, the fridge, the countertops. I organized the spice rack alphabetically. I found a bunch of old, expired stuff in the back of the pantry and threw it out. As I was cleaning, I put on my headphones. Listened to music I hadn't listened to in years. Old rock bands, stuff she called aggressively male. It was glorious. Just me and the music, and the satisfying feeling of scrubbing away grime. I was getting my own space back, both physically and mentally. The constant background noise of her disapproval was gone, replaced by guitar riffs. She came in while I was finishing up. She saw the spotless kitchen. I saw her eye twitch. Just a little bit. This wasn't part of her plan. My constructive, quiet competence was a variable she hadn't accounted for. She tried a new tactic. She started leaving little notes around, passive-aggressive little things. Remember to contemplate the ways your silence mimics the societal silencing of women's voices. I notice you are focusing on physical tasks. Are you avoiding the difficult emotional work? I'd read the notes, crumple them up without expression, and toss them in the trash. They were like little paper mosquitoes. Annoying, but harmless. The silence was my bug spray. Day 5 was a Saturday. I got a text from my friends. They were going to a sports bar to watch a big game. "You in?" Normally, I would have made an excuse. It would have caused a huge fight with Eliana. A whole weekend ruined by the inevitable post-mortem of my toxic night out. But now I had no voice to argue with. I just grabbed my jacket and started walking to the door. Eliana stood in my way. "Where are you going?" I pointed towards the door. "You can't just leave without talking to me about it." I gave her a look, a calm, questioning look. It said, "Are you changing the rules of your own game?" She faltered. She had boxed herself in. She huffed. "Fine, whatever. Go hang out with your Neanderthal friends. Just remember, you're supposed to be in a state of meditative reflection." I walked out the door. Being with my friends was the final piece of the puzzle. I had already texted them the short version of the story. Eliana put me on an 11-day speaking ban. Long story. They thought it was insane, but they were cool about it. I sat at the bar, drank a beer, and just watched the game with them. They included me in the conversation, not caring that I was only responding with thumbs up or a quick note on my phone. They didn't try to analyze me. They didn't lecture me. They just accepted me. It was simple, easy, and real. I realized how much of this I had given up, how much I had isolated myself to appease Eliana. And for what? To be constantly told I was a bad person who needed to be fixed? I got home late that night. The apartment was dark. She was waiting for me on the couch. I could practically taste the anger in the air. She was ready for a fight. She had probably been rehearsing her monologue for hours. I walked right past her, didn't even look in her direction. I went into the bedroom and closed the door. I could hear her sputtering in the living room, a fire with no oxygen. The power dynamic had completely flipped. She was the one who wanted to talk, to argue, to engage, and I was the one denying her, with the very weapon she had handed me. The silence was mine now, and it was powerful. The next morning was Sunday, day 6. I woke up early, feeling rested, truly rested for the first time in what felt like a year. The sun was coming through the blinds. The apartment was quiet. I went for a run. I hadn't done that in ages. It was hard at first, my lungs burning, but after a mile or so, I hit a rhythm. Just the sound of my feet on the pavement and my own breathing. No analysis, no judgment. When I got back, sweating and feeling alive, Eliana was in the kitchen. She had made breakfast, a big, elaborate spread, pancakes, fruit, the works. It was sitting on the table, clearly set for two. This was a new strategy, the kindness offensive. She gave me a soft, gentle smile, the kind she used to give me when we first started dating. She gestured to the chair, an invitation. I just shook my head, a small, polite gesture. I went to the fridge, pulled out a carton of eggs, and started making myself a simple scramble. For one, I could feel her watching my every move. The smile on her face was starting to look strained. I ate my eggs standing at the counter, then washed my plate and put it away. I gave her a brief nod, a gesture one might give a roommate, and went to take a shower. The pancakes sat on the table, untouched. They were still there when I left to run some errands. When I came back, they were gone, scraped aggressively into the trash can. Day 7, she tried to get a rise out of me through nostalgia. She put on the album that was our song when we first met. She sat on the couch, pretending to read, but I knew she was watching me for a reaction, hoping for a flicker of sadness, a hint of the old Jimmy. I gave her nothing. I was in the living room, sorting through some old mail, and I just continued my task with methodical precision. The music was just noise in the background. It had lost its emotional hold on me. The silence had severed those connections. It was like I was looking at our past through a thick pane of soundproof glass. I could see the memories, but I couldn't feel them anymore. The lack of a reaction was clearly getting to her. Her little experiments weren't yielding the expected results, and the scientist was getting frustrated with her test subject. She was losing control of the variables. On day 8, the panic started to set in for her. It was palpable. She cornered me in the hallway as I was coming back from the gym. She looked desperate. Her eyes were a little wild. She started talking, her voice fast and urgent. She told me she'd been thinking, and that maybe 11 days was too long, that she could see I had done a lot of self-reflection, and that she was proud of the work I was doing. She gave me permission to speak. She declared the experiment a success, and therefore over. It was a plea disguised as a royal decree. I just stood there looking at her. This was the moment of truth, my chance to break the silence, to tell her off, to unleash the torrent of frustration I had bottled up for years. And I felt nothing, no desire to speak at all. The silence was no longer her rule. It was my choice. I gave her a slight shake of the head. I then raised my hands and held up 3 fingers. 3 days left. I was going to see this through to the end. On my terms. The look on her face. It was a masterpiece of emotional collapse, confusion, rage, and for the first time, a flicker of genuine fear. She had created a monster of silence, and it was now completely beyond her command. She stammered something about me being childish, about me taking this too far. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. I calmly sidestepped her and went to my room. I closed the door. It was then that I knew, with absolute, unshakable certainty, that the relationship was over. It wasn't even a sad realization. It was just a fact. Like realizing a piece of furniture doesn't fit in a room anymore. The silence hadn't just given me peace, it had given me clarity. I saw the entire relationship laid out before me. It was a long series of me shrinking myself, making myself smaller and smaller to avoid setting her off. I had been so focused on navigating her emotional minefield that I hadn't realized I had abandoned my own territory entirely. These last 8 days, I hadn't just been cleaning the apartment. I had been cleaning out my own head, getting rid of the clutter of her ideology, her endless critiques, her constant draining demands for my emotional energy. I felt clean. I felt solid. I spent the rest of day 8 and all of day 9 making a plan. It was simple, direct. No drama, no grand confrontation. I didn't need one. The silence was the confrontation. I looked up apartments online, found a few possibilities. I made a mental checklist of what I needed to take. I wasn't going to strip the place bare. I didn't want to fight over a sofa or a set of plates. I just wanted my life back, the things that made me, me. On day 10, I started to pack. I brought in a few boxes from the storage locker in the basement. I started in the bedroom while she was out. I took my clothes from the closet, my books from the nightstand. I packed the old framed photo of my friends and me from a camping trip years ago. She had always hated that photo, said it was a monument to performative masculinity. To me, it was a monument to a time when I was happy and uncomplicated. She came home while I was in the middle of it. She stood in the doorway of the bedroom, her mouth slightly open. She saw the boxes. She saw my half-empty closet. The color drained from her face. "What are you doing?" she whispered. Her voice was thin, reedy. I didn't look at her. I just kept folding a stack of shirts and placing them neatly in a box. She took a step into the room. "Jimmy," I said, "what are you doing?" Her voice was louder now, a wobble of panic in it. This had to be it. This had to be the thing that broke my silence. A grand, manipulative gesture in her mind, a way for me to win the argument. She couldn't comprehend that there was no argument. There was only a conclusion. I sealed the first box with packing tape. The sound of the tape dispenser was loud in the tense silence of the room. She lost it. She started yelling. It was a torrent of accusations. I was a child throwing a tantrum. I was manipulative. I was emotionally abusive for doing this to her. She said I was proving every point she had ever made about my toxic nature. It was an impressive display. All her favorite buzzwords were there. Gaslighting, stonewalling, emotional violence. It was the grand finale of her 2-year-long lecture, and I just stood there, listening. Her words, which once had the power to make me feel small and guilty, now felt completely hollow. They were just sounds, noise. They had no more meaning to me than the barking of a distant dog. When she finally ran out of steam, her chest heaving, her face red, I just picked up the box. It was heavy. I grunted slightly. I walked towards the door. She stood in my way, blocking me. "You are not leaving this room until you talk to me," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and desperation. I stopped. I looked at her, then down at the box in my arms. I then looked back at her and tilted my head slightly, an expression that said, "Are you going to move?" She stared into my eyes, searching for something, for the old Jimmy who would cave, who would apologize, who would do anything for a quiet life. He wasn't there anymore. She saw that. Her shoulders slumped. She deflated. She slowly, reluctantly stepped aside. I carried the box out to the living room and placed it by the front door. Then I went back for another. The rest of the evening passed in that same surreal, silent tension. I methodically packed my things, my gaming console, my old guitar, the toolbox my dad gave me. Each item I put in a box felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. She just sat on the couch, watching me, silent. The fight had gone out of her. She was just watching her world fall apart. There were moments when I saw tears silently rolling down her cheeks. A year ago, that sight would have broken my heart, and I would have done anything to fix it. Now, I just felt a distant, detached sort of pity. This was a mess of her own making, the consequence of her own actions. I was no longer responsible for her emotions. I was barely responsible for my own. By the time I went to bed, there was a neat stack of 5 boxes by the front door. My life, condensed. I slept on my side of the bed. She slept on hers. The space between us felt like a mile-wide canyon. The next morning was day 12. The sentence was served. I woke up, showered, and got dressed. I went to the kitchen to make one last cup of coffee in that apartment. She was already there, sitting at the small kitchen table. She looked like she hadn't slept at all. Her face was pale and puffy. She had put on a nice dress, done her makeup, an attempt to present a sense of normalcy, of control. I ignored her, moving through the familiar routine of making coffee. The silence was thick, humming with everything that was about to happen. She watched me, her hands clasped tightly on the table in front of her. When the coffee was ready, I poured it into a mug. I leaned against the counter, taking a slow sip. She finally spoke. Her voice was brittle, artificially cheerful. "Well," she said, forcing a smile, "the 11 days are over. You're allowed to talk now. I hope you took the time to do some serious thinking." She leaned forward slightly, a look of desperate hope in her eyes. She thought this was the moment of reconciliation, the part where I would break down, tell her I had learned my lesson, that I understood now. She thought she had won. I took another slow sip of my coffee. I placed the mug down on the counter with a soft click. I turned my body to face her fully. I looked her right in the eye. My gaze was steady, clear, and completely empty of emotion. And then I spoke. My voice was rusty, but calm. "Yes, I have," I said. "I did a lot of thinking. Thank you." Her smile widened. Relief washed over her face. "Thank you," I continued, my voice even and flat. "These have been the best 11 days of the last 2 years." Her smile didn't just fade, it shattered. It was like watching a statue crack and crumble into dust. Confusion warred with horror in her eyes. What does that mean?" she stammered. I didn't answer. I just picked up my coffee mug and took my keys from the hook by the door. I started walking towards the stack of boxes. Panic set in. She shot up from her chair, knocking it over with a clatter. "What does that mean, Jimmy? You can't just leave. We're supposed to talk about this. I let you have your silence. I gave you what you wanted." I stopped at the door, my back to her. "I did think about us," I said, my voice still devoid of any heat. "And I realize there is no us. There is just you and your ideology and your never-ending project to fix me." I put my hand on the doorknob. "I'm tired of being your project. Goodbye, Eliana." Her voice rose to a shriek. "No, don't you dare walk out that door. You owe me. I invested so much in you." She ran towards me, her words devolving into a stream of desperate pleas and accusations. She said she was sorry, that she had gone too far, that we could go to counseling. She said I was being cruel, that I was throwing everything away over one little fight. She told me she loved me. It all just washed over me. I opened the door. I picked up the first 2 boxes. I walked out into the hallway without looking back. I left her there in the middle of the living room, surrounded by the remnants of our life together. She was still yelling as I walked down the hall, her voice echoing behind me. But for the first time, it was just noise. And then I was out of the building and on the street, and all I could hear was the morning traffic, the sound of the city waking up, the sound of the rest of my life beginning. And it was quiet. A beautiful, peaceful, and totally silent kind of quiet, the kind I owned.